We'll call the meeting September 5th, 2018 of the Quincy Conservation Commission to order. There's a sign-up sheet going around. If you haven't seen it, just if you want to get everybody signed in.
I have it here anyway.
Anybody have signed in?
I think I have it here.
Okay. First order of business is the minutes. Do you have the review the minutes?
Motion to accept the minutes.
Second. All in favor? Okay. All right. We've got a couple things on the agenda. We're going to take one thing out of order because we're waiting for one more member to attend. The Harborside condominium. Because I don't think that needs to be. Come forward.
Because there was a statement.
Yeah, we're missing some things here, but go ahead.
I'll just try to speak up.
Okay.
Good evening, I'm Matthew Watsky, here as counsel for the Harborside. We're here in response to the communication from the commission asking us to come in and address concerns about the timing of mowing of the phragmites in the area of the condominium. It's an activity that was permitted under an order of conditions issued in 2011. There are timing provisions in the conditions of the where selective cutting is permitted up to 3 times a season, earlier in the summer, spring, midsummer, and late summer, and then mowing of let's call it the meadow, the more upland areas of the frag is permitted after August 15th. And unfortunately, the landscaper misunderstood his instructions this year and began mowing some of the frag in the 3rd week of July. Have with me here the representatives of the Dartmouth Group, who are the property manager. You have Tom Shepard and Andy Hughes. Tom was actually called by the foreman of the landscape group, who let him know what was going on, and before Tom ever heard from the commissioner or anything, he was there on site and shut them down, told them to stop. They had to wait until after the August 15th for the mowing. So it's an activity that's permitted. The problem was the timing of it, and I think our goal is to make sure that there's better communication with the landscapers in the future, and provide them with written instructions about what they can and cannot do. And I think it also would be good for Tom and Andrew to put in as a procedure to give the commission a written notice in advance, so that you folks are aware of what's being planned and when it's going to happen, so there are no surprises.
Address the issue.
You address the issue.
All right. Thank you, folks. Appreciate your fitting in.
Thank you for being here.
We're going to take 184.
Did you want to explain we're waiting for
Yes, we're waiting for one more member to have a quorum on the Long Island issue. She was here for the first meeting. She's on her way, so we'll take something. We'll take the
184 Billings Road.
Babcock Street has been continued to October 3rd. If anyone's here on that, Babcock and C Street, the city of Quincy's. So we're going to take 184 Billings Road. It's continued case, notice of intent. Lastly, what was the reason we were continuing? It was continued for.
neighborhood, wasn't it, Bill?
No, actually, I think it wasn't in order for us to get a DPC number, which we did.
Okay.
We just were able to get it this afternoon. So this is on a notice of intent. The applicant is seeking to demolish a single-family home in a residential B district and to construct a 2-family home. He's modified his plans somewhat. He does not intend to disturb the grade of the land. We had our wetland specialist, Stephen Ivers, go out to the site, examine the site, confirm with the city that there is no isolated land subject to flowage on the site. So it's really just land subject to coastal storm. The building is going to be constructed above the 11-foot level, a foot and 1 inch above, 12.1 feet above. So the construction will be such that the flowage will go underneath the building if there is any flood of 100-year level that may or may not come. What else can I tell you? The impervious surface will increase slightly with the construction of the new building. However, there are also going to be some dry wells placed in the site to offset that. You know, in fact, it's more than likely even improve the you know, any type of flooding within the site for any type of slight storm. If it's a hurricane or a 100-year flood, obviously there's going to be more concern than just the fact that there's a two-family new structure there. The structure that exists has a cellar, has a basement roof.
So this is
That'll be filled
improved.
in. This is actually an improvement.
Yeah, we did get Steve Ivis is the owner, Steve Ivis, is it?
Wetland special.
A wetland special, okay. We did get an email from Steve Ivis on this saying that it is land subject to coastal storm flowage, but he did, in his email, say that it does not contain isolated land subject to flooding. So he's confirmed that. There's some water and pool on the site, but there is not large enough to contain an ILSF volume. So it's clear of that. Great, and his comments will be put into the record, but. Any other questions about it?
Is the property where it sits now, you've got two families and you've got a house way in the back, is that gonna come forward and level?
The home is going to come forward. It's not going to level the property. The property grade is going to remain the same. So
No,
we're
I
not
mean, is it gonna line up on the street looking like
like the other homes on
the
the
other
street.
two?
I believe so. I defer to the owner actually on that. The building itself will be in line with the other.
Give me your name.
My name is Ed.
And you.
Yes.
Is it going to have the front door the same as the two others on each side, or is it gonna stay set back the way it is now?
We're gonna have greens up front, and it's gonna step a little bit further more back from the other house.
But not as far back as it is now?
Now, we have the July 25th memo from our civil engineer asking certain questions. That's what was addressed in this.
This is your email.
Oh, okay. Well, what the one is, the operation and maintenance plan of the drainage system should be submitted for review and reporting to the Norfolk County Registry of Deeds. The plan should include the final responsibilities of maintenance work and will be vested. So we would make, is that acceptable condition?
That's acceptable, yes.
Put that in order conditions. So that those conditions have been addressed. We've got the wetlands report, or review that it's not land subject to flooding. Any other questions?
The application says for demo a single-family, construct a two-family dwelling. The plan that I have said proposed three-story dwelling.
I think it means three-story,
Stories, not three.
3 stories, not 3.
not three
Family.
dwellings.
Not three-family, I'm just saying,
Yeah,
you're going
3
three
stories.
stories.
Yes,
Not three dwellings.
Okay.
which is allowed by the zoning.
I thought the same thing.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay. This is a notice of intent, right? So do we have a motion?
You have to open the doors.
Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't finish the hearing last time. So well, let me ask, is there anyone who wants to speak in favor, ask questions, or speak opposed? Please come up, identify yourself.
Thank you.
My name is Charlie O'Brien. I live across from 184 and 177 Village Roadway Way, and I've lived there for 35 years. Our only concern, I haven't seen the recent drainage schemes. Our only concern is that that's a low point on Village Road. And that area is subject to slow drainage during hurricanes, thunderstorms, northeasters. And I have received some information that they're installing more drainage in the area now. The question we have is, where is the drainage going to go if the sidewalk gets changed and the driveways get installed? Because the neighbors, there's a lot of impact to the neighbors in the area. And I'm worried being across the street, I have the water at my door, and and I'm worried that now it's gonna be against the foundation. But again, if the drainage structures that are being installed in the remainder of the property now, I'm comfortable that I've heard that, but I'd just like to have the assurances from the board that, you know, that.
Here is the detailed drainage plan.
That's correct.
So they are doing improvements to it with the drainage.
It's a change from what was originally filed.
What was originally filed?
How much just that?
The dry wells, the locations of the dry wells.
Front and back.
The one in the front, one in the back.
One in the back. Because what we change is to put one in the back where the parking is, and one in the front, so we'll cover both.
And use a driver.
So that could be part of the order of conditions if necessary as well. That those would be the locations of the dry wells, one in the front and one in the rear.
Like I said, again, all the concern is, I know the water, I know the site takes a lot of water, and it's gotta be removed and replaced. It's just a matter of where the water goes, if, you know, if the conditions up there change, the stuff that flows now down there.
If it's coastal storm.
No, it's all slow drainage, it's the city's issue.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think I see a city, they do it. I Stephen, and next door. 190 building.
What's your last name?
There, about the 184 because they buy a house here, and then even the 2second floor, yeah, in my next neighbor.
Yeah.
But he said that they got fill up the foundation, so I don't want to fill up the people. The water, fill up the back up my house and back up the street. So even trying to get the water, he said. So the city, they still doing nothing about that. Every time it's flood, they can't. Every time they take up that's it.
But they won't have a,
Yeah, initially, we were proposing to change the grade of the property because of the concerns of the neighborhood. The applicant decided to keep the grades as is until essentially allowing the flows to go
to go over his land and then have the drivers. Okay, then that's
So
the
there will
best.
be no change in the grade of the
And there'll be an improvement because you're adding
the
the
dry
drivers.
wells.
So it's gonna either be the same or better, and it sounds like it's gonna
Oh,
be
I
better.
mean, that's,
And again, this is information that we
Yeah,
expect.
and
So,
you can
but
review
we
that.
just wanted to make sure that,
This is new to us too.
Yeah, must
Right.
not fill up the place. Yeah, that's right.
we just wanted understood that there is an issue there with the water in the street. And we wanted to make sure that that was addressed and apparently.
Addressed as best they can.
Right, yeah. Just as long as it's not more.
If it's raining, a lot of water coming.
No, it has to be the same or better. It
Yeah.
should be better.
Okay.
And the engineers has a letter in here, and they've addressed all his concerns, including the maintenance plan.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? So, we turned in everything in the first case, right?
Yeah.
So we can
Okay.
pass it.
We didn't get to.
Oh, we didn't get to it, okay. Continue third time.
Yes,
Okay. So, no other comments that we can?
Want to move
Yes.
forward
It's all the way
and accept the order conditions?
Order conditions with the condition as stated in the engineer's
That's correct.
number 8 and the driveways. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
ready tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Four, this will go into Harborside condominiums done. Still waiting for one more person.
Do we have anything
We
else?
can continue, well, we have enough of quorum on new matters, so we could do 100 Quarry Hills Drive. Notice of intent filed by Boston Gas Company. National Grid, the applicant proposes to implement an invasive species removal and control program within an existing utility right-of-way. The resource area is bordering vegetated wetlands.
My consultant's not here yet, so I don't have the green cards, but I can
Okay.
discuss the initial part of the project if you want me to
Sure.
start.
But as good as we are,
Yeah, we'll get the green cards, but
Sure.
just make sure we don't miss those.
You have your, excuse me?
your green card.
No, I do not. My consultant's on her way. She's
Oh,
just went by parking, so change over here.
I know.
Confused us a little bit. So, my name is Andrea Agostino. I'm an environmental scientist with National Grid, and we have before you a notice of intent for an ecological restoration program. It's essentially a proactive invasive species treatment, and what it is we have a gas station that's located in Milton, right on the Milton-Quincy town line on the edge of the Blue Hills Reservation. And we had some a construction project there for new infrastructure. And as part of our permitting with DCR and other agencies, DCR had requested us to treat the Phragmites that's on the gas pipeline to make sure it doesn't spread onto their property. So what we have before you is a notice of intent. We reviewed it with Natural Heritage, with DCR. Their approvals are included in the packet. And essentially it's two parts. One, the portion of the line that's outside of our gas pipeline is City of Quincy property. So we had the mayor's office review it and city solicitor, Mr. Jim Higgins, sign off as the property owner on the notice of intent. So if you look through it, there's, I don't have the plan with me, it's in your packet. It's essentially the swap of the pipeline between the edge of the Granite Links Golf Course and the take station, and then it's thinking a 100-foot buffer on either side. And that is the area that is slated for the treatment. So what we have is we have a licensed herbicide applicator that will be doing backpack spraying, and then they'll also be using a small piece of equipment to move equipment and men into the area in a quantum fashion to treat the Phragmites. And we have 3 treatments proposed. One would be this October before the first frost, and then a following in 2020, and then a third treatment in 2022. So this treatment would be covered by the first NOI.
And I see the line of.
Right, so if you look at the figure,
Right.
the blue polygon is the limited treatment. You can actually see the actual purple and orange shading, and that shows the actual extent of the Phragmites that would be treated within that blue polygon. And so the gray and white dashed linear shows the actual pipeline corridor, and then the blue shows the full extent of the 100-foot buffer on either side that we would treat. And that is what is recommended by both our conversations with DCR and Natural Heritage and our herbicide applicator as making sure we treat a larger area than just the pipeline so the regrowth is not occur as quickly.
Any questions from the board?
Yeah, if it's okay, I would like to have in the order of conditions that even though they got an order of conditions, that they're going to notify us 48 hours before anybody touches the property every year.
Sure.
And the reason being, the residents call us, and this is why we got issues earlier tonight. If we know about it, we can say we're aware of it.
Understood.
If not, then it becomes an issue.
And it would be this year, be every 2 years to see if there's any regrowth between the treatments. So it would be on a 2-year cycle, but we certainly, before the treatment, would notify the office.
Any questions or comments? Okay.
I also don't have a pool. I don't know if you received that.
Well, don't leave.
No, I'll stay here.
All right, so this is a notice of intent, so we need a motion.
Motion to accept.
Close there?
Anybody in the audience?
I did.
You did. Sorry.
All right, motion, a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you. I'll wait until
Okay.
paperwork is. Thank you very much.
Now, next one is 55 George Road. This is a request for determination of applicability, followed by Michael Harris. The applicant proposes to demo a garage in Breezeway and install a 28-foot by 18.7-foot foundation for a bedroom, bathroom, and small breezeway. Resource area is land subject to coastal storm flow.
Hi there. My name is Michael Harris, my wife Linda Baldwin, and my builder Bob Casagrande. We had proposed a addition a few years back, and our approval ran out on March 11, 2017. Okay? We had requested an extension of that proposal. Our addition is a little different than it was then. It's actually smaller, but it's on the exact same plot plan. You know, nothing is bigger than what we're doing as far as the ground. We had a 2-story addition then, now we have a 1-story addition. We are in the wetlands area, so on February 24th, 2015, we got an approval from the zoning board of Quincy on that proposal, and we're requesting that we just get that extended.
Okay, yeah, look, the second plan is the older 215 and have a larger footprint, and now you've got a smaller footprint.
Correct.
And the resource area is just, what's our resource, land subject to coastal storm flowage. What is the foundation for the extension?
Concrete?
Is it any flow through there?
No, it's going to be a crawl space,
Cross there.
so it's not a full foundation.
So it's not full foundation.
Is it a floodplain?
It's just land subject to coastal storm flowage. See what happens in a minute.
I have a full set of plans if you're interested.
I'm just wondering, I'm just confused why we're not doing a flow through.
What is that?
A flow through foundation, basement, crawl space, the water just keeps flowing through.
What we have on the foundation plan.
It's just that everything we have approved in the last few years has been flow through.
If it's in coastal storm flowage,
Yes.
where's the water?
I think he's got
gonna
5 basement windows. Ventilation windows.
go? That's the zone.
Yeah, we're only about the ground and below.
Okay.
Yeah, we have no problem with the addition itself, because it was approved before, but we do want to know what, if there's going to be storm flowage, where it's going to go. Well, what is there now? Well, what is,
There's a slab there right now with an existing garage and a breezeway. That's going to be removed. And then the addition is just a master bedroom and bathroom. Same exact size as was originally proposed for a 2-story.
so it's
house.
existing slab there.
But the slab is being removed, are you going to crush stone, or are you leaving that slab there?
That's going to all be removed.
So you're going to crush stone
Crushed
and a crawl
stone down
space?
below.
Correct.
Exactly, and just a crawl space. But I think there's 5 windows in the foundation
That would almost
for
be.
ventilation.
Is that,
That would be classified as flow.
Yeah,
Back
good.
here, right?
Yeah.
that's what they would call it?
Yeah. So
Yeah, you're not building a slab foundation
Right.
or a sunken basement.
that was the question.
Okay.
Okay. As long as the water's gonna flow through and not disturb the neighbors, I'll back all
We're
over.
going to take your share of it,
Yeah.
basically. Okay. Any other questions from the board? Any comments from, or questions? Okay. This is a request for determination of applicability, so our vote is just,
I'll try to move that the act does not apply in this case.
okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. You're all set.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Will do.
We have 60 Norton Road, notice of intent filed by Angela Chen. The applicant proposes the removal and replacement of a seawall that collapsed during the recent storms. Let me see if the notice of
This is contingent. Well, I was at the meeting for the seawall. Why is this seawall not included in the master plan?
Quiet today, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Michael Clark. I'm with Design Consultants. And I'm here representing Angela Chen, the homeowner. She is not here this evening. So in the June meeting, a couple months ago, the commission approved an emergency order for the month of July to repair a section of seawall that had collapsed at the site. So during the month of July, contractor was at the site, demolished the existing seawall. At that time, we had found that the One of the reasons for failure was that there'd been some significant beach erosion there, and the footing was about a foot below grade. So we removed the entire old seawall that collapsed. We also, a piece of the seawall that was built at a different time, abutting the piece that had failed, also had some damage, so we replaced that. It was only about 3 feet at the bottom of the seawall. The new seawall is reinforced concrete with a substantial cantilever footing that goes back into the upland area. I forgot to talk about the resource areas. Land subject to coastal flooding. The wall is a coastal bank, and there was some work, temporary work on the beach. Okay, I apologize for that. We put some erosion controls in. The work was done. There is a right-of-way abutting a property that the town owns for access to the beach. The work was done there. A portion of the city's seawall was temporarily dismantled. It consisted of granite blocks. That was repaired and concrete and grouted in place. So the wall has been completed, and we have submitted, along with the notice of intent, a request for a certificate of compliance along with an as-built plan. So I entertain any questions.
So this was done under the original emergency order, and now
Yeah.
you're looking to...
Correct, Mrs. Chen could
formalize.
not find someone to do the work in time,
Yeah.
so that's when we approached Mr. Duker about it, getting an emergency order for the month of July to do the work.
And the neighbors have been notified, and it's been done.
I'm confused on something.
Okay.
Okay, I did attend the seawall meeting for the neighbors.
Excuse me, ma'am?
We had a huge seawall meeting with the city of Quincy,
Correct.
Babcock Street, C Street, Chickatawbit, which would have been Norton Road also.
Yes.
So how do you now take your finished seawall, and the city's gonna come through there and put a new seawall for everybody?
Okay, so this is a private seawall. We checked with the
Okay, but then
consultant.
also, I did check. and they
Yeah,
are
we did
doing
check with the
private.
consultant.
Yeah.
So that's, and it was, it was a real emergency. Another northeaster would have done substantial damage to the property and also to the city's right of way. So that was a reason for it. And the second reason, one of the other reasons that did this is Mrs. Chen. Her husband passed away, so she is selling the house and trying to wrap everything up for her also.
I just don't know how this fits in with our seawall repair of the city of Quincy.
I don't know, Mike, maybe you can touch on that?
Yeah, again, my understanding is it's a private seawall, it's not part of the seawall that's going to be repaired. I had a conversation again with your consultant.
Yep.
And I actually asked him if there was money available to do the wall, to assist Mrs. Chen. There was some loan money available, but it really didn't make sense for her given the time.
So, I mean, we didn't have any problem, it's a private seawall, so.
But we
She
have
took it up.
several private seawalls are being repaired by the city. Everybody's got a private or a public, and it's being repaired by the city. Only because I know of one house where they did go and ask, I'm private, but am I being repaired? And yes, the answer was yes. I don't know where the tie-in is.
Yeah, this is something I couldn't wait. We only repaired the portion of the wall that failed. The other portion of the wall was of a newer nature and was in much better condition, so we didn't remove that portion of the wall.
What I'm assuming that's going to happen, and I'm assuming, is this is going to be tied in with the repair coming down the road, which is fine.
But you'll at least do the emergency part now,
Yeah.
and if the city does more, the city does more.
Yeah, or changes it, or makes it something different.
But it's been done under an emergency order, and
Yeah.
is anyone inspecting it?
We didn't have an inspector. John, did you inspect it? No, I didn't inspect it either.
Say again?
We can inspect it, no problem.
Because we have to get a certificate of compliance, so I have to send something down there.
Yeah, so so what I'm trying to do is close all the dots.
Yeah,
Cross all the T's and dot all the I's. So you should, yeah, I agree, you should send someone down to inspect it. And I guess the only other question I have is procedurally, if you issue an order of conditions and we have a certificate of compliance, do we need to record all of them, or is it
I
a
mean,
moot
I
point?
can run down there tomorrow, call Nora, we can
Okay.
sign tonight, and you'll be all set.
Awesome.
As long as everybody else agrees.
I think it has to be.
It's at the end of Wampatuck Road, right?
Excuse me, sir?
It's at the end of Wampatuck Road.
I believe that's a side street, yeah.
It's a relatively large new home,
Yeah.
beautification.
So, now, I mean, the certificate of compliance may have to wait for the appeal period.
Okay.
So we could issue the notice.
True.
of intent now, and no
Yeah.
one's objecting, presumably that will pass, but we can't issue the certificate of compliance. So
So we'll do an inspection and get into your period of time and you're ready.
Fantastic.
let's just say, any neighbors, anybody have any questions about this or comments? No, so it looks like it's a good project. Okay, do we have a motion for the notice of intent?
Notice of intent.
Yes, it's a notice of intent to confirm the work that's done, subject to the inspection,
Subject to the inspection.
okay?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And then you will start the process, you can look at it for this, you'll look at it for the certificate of compliance, and that could be issued at the next meeting.
Great. Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Is it ready right now for inspection?
It's done?
Yes, it's on,
Mike, is it done?
Yeah, it's completed, that's why we submitted it. It was done at the end of, we had the 30 days in July, and it was done during July.
All right, now we're to, the only matter left is, we have our quorum for continuing the Long Island Bridge, Moon Island, notice of intent filed by the City of Boston, continued case. Applicants proposing to replace the superstructure of the Long Island Bridge between Moon Island and Long Island. Portion of the project in Quincy involves placing new bridge spans over existing piers, and improving the bridge storm water system. Coastal resources of coastal beaches, coastal banks, land subject to coastal storm flowage. It's a continuation of our July, because we didn't have a quorum in August, and we have our original quorum of 4 members, so we can continue it. I'm just looking at my package to make sure we have everything. I've got the original notice of intent, the Quincy consultants' questions that were raised in June, the Boston response that was filed July 13. Then City of Boston submitted changes to the plan on July 31st. Quincy then had response to the Boston's response on August 21st. Then Boston issued a letter of response to Quincy on August 28th. Quincy now has issued, the most recent one is their concrete report, as I call it, September 3rd, and Boston submitted on September 5th response to that. Is that our universe?
That does seem like our universe.
Okay.
Sam Rose may have. One point of clarification. I'm Sam Moffett from TRC. I'm not sure what you're referring to with a change of plans. I'm not sure what that is.
July 31st, Long Island notice of project change, notice of project.
Oh, that's the MEPA filing.
That's the MEPA
Just
filing.
a point of clarification.
Yeah, I used the one.
Thank you.
The MEPA filing where you just, from one of my, okay, thank you.
No problem. So I'm Chris Osgood. I'm here with the city team. Delighted to be back. As you noted for the third time, obviously we've been engaged in a lot of correspondence since May and a lot of conversations, especially before that. The team here is, again, we're happy to be back. We're here if you have an interest to sort of present, again, the overall project and the approach that we're taking. As we did back in the June meeting, we're also happy to answer any questions you have about any of the correspondence, the original submission in May, the NEPA filing, the July submission, to your questions, the August answer answers to your questions as well. And also happy to hear, obviously, from the elected officials in Quincy as well as any members of the public who want to provide testimony on this. Overall, as you know, our interest is to rebuild the Long Island Bridge so that we can reopen a recovery campus on Long Island that really can serve folks across this entire region. So I'm happy to take your lead, whether it's answering questions, re-providing the presentation, or hearing testimony from the public.
And as an alternative, we have paper copies of the presentation, if that would be a lower impact, easier solution for the members.
Okay. We'll proceed. We're going to give an overview there?
Great. Well, I'll turn it over to Sam, who will sort of walk us through a quick overview of the project.
I just need to make sure this gets lit up the way I want it. So hopefully this will fire up here in a second. People will recall we filed our notice of intent on May 17th, excuse me. We were here for our first presentation on June 6th, and on June 6th we provided this presentation, which is pretty skewed, and I apologize for that. We're kind of jury-rigged here. The project was, from the very beginning, the direction that we received from the City of Boston. I'm with TRC and the environmental consultant. With me here is Nicole Bulger and Bill Goulet from STB, which are they're representing the design engineer for the project. We were advised by the city that we were to design a solution, a project, and a construction approach that would minimize impacts to wetlands. That was our number one priority, because we understood the importance that both Boston and Quincy were going to place on protection of environmental resources. So we designed a project, the STV team, designed a project that minimizes construction activities that are in Quincy. It provides a new bridge superstructure that has improved stormwater performance relative to the old superstructure, that is going to be safe for 75 years, and also is designed with potential sea level rise, climate adaptation in mind, with higher elevations. And we remain confident, as we were when we first presented this to the Commission back in June, that we've met all of these directions. The superstructure has, we're calling it the same roadway profile. We're using the same piers, and I know that's a subject that has generated an awful lot of interest, and we're looking forward to answering questions that people have. But by using the same piers, we are able to avoid work that is in the water that's going to alter the floor of Boston Harbor. The higher clearance, as I said, to provide climate adaptation and resiliency, stormwater management, and we also have met Coast Guard requirements with respect to the navigation channel, which is on the Boston end of the structure. The old bridge, people will recall, was had a truss, was built about 50 years ago, and as people can see, it had run through its design life and needed to be replaced. The new proposed superstructure, there's an image down here below, is characterized once again by a truss at the navigation span, and also by new delta frame supports on top of each of the piers. This is going to provide a sleeker profile, and once again, the sea level rise is illustrated on this figure, and this shows that the tops of the piers and the road surface itself are elevated relative to the old structure. With respect to alterations of wetland resource areas or buffers in Quincy on Moon Island. We, as I said, went to great lengths to find a solution that would allow us to minimize temporary or permanent alterations. And they're illustrated on this, which is also in the NOI that was submitted, but down here in the fine print, I regret that it's still fine print even though we're projecting this on the screen here, but the punchline is that what we have proposed is no alteration of land under the ocean. That's a zero, and we continue to stand by that assessment and feel very comfortable in making that assessment. We have 80 square feet of temporary alteration of coastal beach and land containing shellfish, and that is associated with our proposal to put two, excuse me, they're here, you barely see them, 4 pipe piles driven into the coastal beach area to support a temporary trestle, which would facilitate construction of the last span of the bridge. Again, we've minimized their pipe piles that will go in and then be removed at the end of the work. We also have characterized this temporary alteration here within the coastal bank. I think there was some confusion over the course of the summer about what exactly we were talking about in that area. The old structure had a pier, what's called Pier 1 at this location, and the foundation of Pier 1 has, the superstructure of it has been removed as part of the demolition of the old structure, but the concrete foundation is still present in the field. And what we're proposing is to utilize that hard surface to place temporary structures on to, once again, facilitate the construction of the final span. So there's no permanent alteration of coastal bank in that area. It's using existing concrete foundation, bringing in the structure with rubber-tired vehicles. There's no, to be conservative, we included that in our NOI, but we're comfortable in saying that it's a very minor temporary alteration that we're talking about in that location. And again, improved stormwater performance because we're providing the stormwater system on the bridge to treat stormwater that falls on the bridge structure in accordance with the Massachusetts stormwater policy. And this figure here is the non-intertidal area. This is from the municipal boundary between Quincy and Boston out in the harbor back towards Moon Island. And as you can see, there's no impact in this area that we're proposing. Once again, we described in the NOI, we've also described in the notice of project change that we submitted to the state, to the MEPA office of the state, that the city is proposing to do repair work to the piers, but the repair work to the piers is going to be in the dry. It's not going to include cofferdams. It's not going to include activities that are going to alter the floor of the harbor. And through the specifications that will be the basis for the city procuring a contractor to do this work, there will be a requirement that the contractor is not allowed to work in the water and do any activities that impact the floor of the harbor. And he's going to be required, he or she is going to be required to use best management practices, structural best management practices to prevent any debris from being released into the harbor during the repair of the piers. So this, again, this is a figure that shows the piers, the existing piers. And this shows the repair work that would be proposed. And I'll let one of my colleagues speak to the engineering details of that.
Thank you, Sam. I'm Nicole Balger. I'm with STV Incorporated, the designer of record for the project. This is, again, something that we presented back in June, so no change. It simply shows you, again, our typical pier elevation. You'll see here that we have Our proposed limit of demolition, we're taking the top of the pier cap off. We're installing post-tensioning to strengthen the concrete core of the pier. We're repointing and repairing the granite facing of the piers, and we're building a new concrete cap. This was all included in the notice of intent, but just to clarify everything that's being done. Again, this goes through the staging of what I just described. We take down the top of the existing pier cap, remove the granite from the top, place a new concrete cap after we have installed these post-tension strengthening rods.
The strengthening rod, just,
Sure.
is that something that's drilled in the
Yes,
existing?
into the top of
There's no
the
pier
center
there.
of the pier, though. We're not out, we're all, everything happens within the footprint of the existing pier.
Right now it's solid granite and you're putting the post.
So they take off the granite cap and demolish the concrete down as needed, and then they drill down into the concrete and the strengthening right through the core.
And so we have included in the NOI a designated area where the contractor, we would propose for the contractor to be allowed to, during high tide, tie alongside barges to bring equipment over to Moon Islands. And the concept at this point is that there will be a crane, a large piece of equipment will be required at this location to facilitate the movement of girders, steel elements of the bridge span into place. And we've identified this area as kind of a worst case assessment of where the contractor would be allowed to tie alongside to transship materials or equipment onto the paved parking lot here at Moon Island and then move over towards the abutment area and the bridge construction area, and then to demobilize it afterwards. We recognize the importance of minimizing the impact on the city of Quincy and minimizing traffic on the city streets in Quincy. We've prepared and presented an approach here that we feel pretty comfortable minimizes that particular potential impact. And the final point I'll make on this, because I know this is something else that's been raised as a question at various times over the course of the summer, is through the specifications, the city of Boston is going to stipulate that the contractor selected to do the work is not allowed to bottom out his barges at that location. And I'll say contractors, because the barges that they own are valuable pieces of equipment, they're not really inclined to allow their barges to bottom out in any event because they're concerned about the risk of damage. So that's the presentation that we provided last spring. Again, very minor coastal wetland alterations have been proposed in this NOI. We stand by the impact numbers that we presented back in May and initially presented to you in this presentation on June 6th. And once again, no alteration of land under the ocean is proposed in this NOI. Very minor alteration of coastal beach land containing shellfish, temporary to facilitate construction. This 512 square feet of coastal bank, once again, is the footprint of the foundation area under the former Pier 1, where Boston is proposing to put temporary structures on top of an existing foundation, and when they demobilize, take that steel back away again, leave that concrete pad where it is. They're not proposing to change the resource permanently. And once again, we've in effect double counted 592 square feet land subject to coastal storm flowage, which is a combination of these two numbers here because they happen to correspond to land subject to coastal storm And there is a small area of what we're proposing as a permanent buffer zone alteration up at the abutment area, the approach roadway, which is to improve the geometry of the approach roadway. And it's outside of the resource area. It's in this buffer zone area, and you can't even really quite see it, but it's a little sliver right there because they need to provide safe geometry for 2 lanes to access the roadway. The pavement needs to be just a touch wider on one side. Once again, it's buffer zone alteration, and that was intentional. Did everything we could to avoid resource area alterations. So I think that's all the presentation we provided back in June. And again, as Mr. Osgood said, we're very happy to answer questions, and we are hopeful that by the conclusion of tonight's hearing, members of the commission may be inclined to close the hearing, and we can move forward one way or the other.
I'll just note, I did see in the NEPA file, and I raised questions about alternatives analysis, and we did provide some. Not everybody will agree with that, but I did see that in the no-build and shared service alternatives. Any other questions?
No. Is he familiar with this? Paper?
Yes, the most recent one. Yeah, we'll address that in a minute.
He is aware, okay.
And I think the other concern that I had was the pier repair work. From what I remember, the photographs from June was there is some deterioration below the water surface, and you're not going to do any work below the water surface. How would you address that?
I'll refer that again to our colleagues in this team.
There will be repair work performed below the water level, but it will be, there are structures that can be attached to the pier from the top. It's a containment structure. And so most of that work would be performed at low tide. So it's below what we would call the mean high water line, but it would be still some work that they could perform in the dry, either by pumping out something that's attached to the pier itself, not touching the seafloor, or just with the regular tidal fluctuations. There's a large tidal fluctuation out there, as I'm sure you know.
But some of the debris that's in the pointing now, that will end up on the seafloor.
No, they'll be required to build a containment system around the pier, attached to the pier, so that the debris would be captured.
And that's
fully
100%.
That it should. I would recommend that it be a condition as something that the commission is likely concerned about, but that's the way that the contract documents would be written as well.
And that's a temporary containment, you're not putting
Yes.
permanent containment.
No, this would be a temporary construction like a containment system.
What's that containment made of? How is it?
There are different alternatives for that, so we would consider that the contractor's means and methods, but there are various systems available for that type of work.
I know there's a couple points that the city wants to address with their consultant. Do we have any more questions now, or do we want to?
I have one question, I guess, about the stormwater performance. So you said it's going to be improved. Is that compared to the older bridge, correct? Not, because right now there's no stormwater performance.
Correct. The old structure was equipped with very minimal stormwater management facilities and essentially drained to the harbor. You have to maintain safety on the deck, you have to get the stormwater off. And the old structure, it just went to the harbor. Now, what we're proposing is to, with catch basins and pipes, convey stormwater to pre-treatment. And then, again, Ms. Bulger is the designer, so she's the better person to speak to that.
So we use typical bridge scupper, system that collects the water, runs it back to the abutments where it goes through, is routed through a storm scepter unit, and then discharges back into the tidal influence area. So,
And do you have a percentage of how much stormwater is caught through that system, or?
it should be all of it.
All of it?
It's sized differently. The idea being that even from a public safety perspective, as Sam mentioned, we need to pull our off the road.
At this point, I know the city we have a consultant that has addressed some of the issues and issued a recent report. Should we hear from them first?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask for a brief recess. The team is downstairs, I've been in touch with them.
Okay.
I'm gonna go get them. But I did have one question about the storm scepter system. How do you protect that from freezing?
It's typically below the frost level, right?
But it's in the ocean. Just
No, the storm scepter is actually back behind the abutment in the earth. It's a typical installation for this type of unit.
But how does
It's
it
not
get all the
actually on
way?
the bridge itself.
How do you get all the way from the middle of the bridge to the storm scepter?
That's the piping system. It's a standard bridged piping system similar to what's used by Mass DOT.
So it won't freeze above the water line? I was just curious.
If I was just asked for
Oh,
a couple of breaks.
Is the team here? I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I didn't see them here. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, we have three people that are going to present on behalf of the city of Quincy, their coach, and their professional staff. Although I did introduce myself way back on June 6th, I'd like to take the opportunity to say hello again and let you know who I am. My name is John Shea. I'm an environmental lawyer with the environmental law firm of Mackey Shea in Boston. I have been practicing wetland law for 36 years, both permitting, appeals, enforcement, and teaching. I've been mostly an applicant and commissioner's lawyer in review of projects from Truro out to Lenox and everywhere in between. And I was chair of the Conservation Commission for 8 years, so I can understand the challenges of the many meetings and complex projects that we've got to deal with. I am pleased to be working with the really excellent engineers and scientists at Ty and Bond, and with extremely knowledgeable city staff who provide a historic perspective and perspective on how other projects have been handled that would be lost if they weren't involved in the process. Since June 6th, when I last addressed the commission, and when Ty and Bond and the commission demanded that the Boston Public Works Department submit additional information to you, the city has submitted a package on July 13th, which Ty and Bond critiqued in its August 21st memo. Dave Murphy will address that in a little more detail. And the commission also received in yesterday's mail an August 28th letter from the Boston Public Works Department with an attachment. Quincy also submitted an evaluation of the condition of the existing concrete piers by Dr. David Gress, and Duncan Malord from Ty and Bond will summarize the salient points in that memo. I was surprised to hear that there was a there was a September 5th response to that memo submitted. The city's team wasn't provided a copy of that, so we're not in a position to comment on that.
But I feel, before I turn it over to Dave and Duncan, I feel compelled to respond to the city's repetitive mantra in its July 13th letter, that the Quincy Conservation Commission has no jurisdiction to demand information, which, by the way, Boston provided most of under protest. And its further audacious claim that the Quincy Conservation Commission should not exercise its authority under its ordinance to require, and I quote from their letter, quote, information and plans as are deemed necessary by the commission to describe the proposed activities and their effects on the environment. Boston doesn't believe you have the authority to demand that sort of information. That's outrageous. The commission should reject the claims that you demand additional information that will allow you to fully assess what are the likely impacts to the wetland resource areas if the piers require more repair, heck, even replacement, if the concrete is not as sound as claimed, without supporting data for that claim. And Duncan will address that technical memo that addresses that work. And you're also entitled to determine what mitigation measures are appropriate and necessary to protect wetland resource areas and wetland interests from the greater repair or replacement of the piers. The impact numbers, the low impact numbers that they're showing you, those are illusory. They're deliberately low, and they don't acknowledge the fact that there's a lot of work to do on those piers to support the structure that they want to put on. In their memo, they criticize your administration of your own wetland ordinance. There's nothing inappropriate with you administering your ordinance more strictly than the Wetlands Protection Act. They don't want you to, because you have more authority. You can be more strict. In fact, that was the purpose of home rule wetlands laws. Cities and towns were tired of DEP overturning their decisions and second-guessing the judgments that were made under the Wetlands Protection Act. So 231 cities and towns in Massachusetts either have bylaws or ordinances. You have them. You're entitled to exercise that special authority that you have under the ordinance, irrespective of the claim of the city of Boston. Your purview of this project is not limited to the Wetlands Protection Act, as they claim. I thought what was most amazing in the August 28th memo was the admission that the plans before you are going to be superseded as, quote, advanced design and construction plans are prepared. How can you approve a project without seeing the final plans for the project? Trust us, it'll be fine. You should not trust that statement. You should see the final plans now, not later. The best management practices are exactly what this commission needs to review. You cannot legally defer the appropriateness of best management practices to the city of Boston's contractor. That's your job, not the contractor being paid for by Boston. You need to know, what are these BMPs? What's going to be proposed? Are they going to work? How are they going to work? Should we approve them? Should we require something more? That's your job, not a contractor's job. I think the audacity of Boston is taken to a new low when in the package of information they submitted to you, they submitted the Boston Conservation Commission's approval order of conditions. I want to remind you back on June 6th that the Boston Public Works Department was playing on home turf before the Boston Conservation Commission with a local umpire. In fact, there was a pre-negotiated order of conditions even before the hearing was opened. And it was agreed to even before the tie and bond memo that was submitted to the Conservation Commission, the ink had a chance to dry. There was one brave commissioner, Alice Richmond, one of the finest trial lawyers that I've met in my career. And she said, I cannot, in good conscience, vote to approve this project when I haven't even had time to review the tie and bond memo. But of course, right now, they submitted that order to you, and I gotta tell you, that order is a nullity. It's been appealed to DEP. It means nothing. Shouldn't mean anything to you. You're not bound to follow what the home team did for the home team. So I ask you, after you hear the presentation of tie and bond, to reject this trust us approach to permitting. If there's a problem, we'll come back before you. You guys ever try to fix something after it's gone to hell in a handbasket? It ain't easy. People come in kicking and screaming with all sorts of excuses. That shouldn't fall on you. You shouldn't trust them. And you shouldn't trust an unknown general contractor who's going to come up with methods and means and best management practices. Those are for you to decide whether you like them or not. I ask you to demand the show me approach before you even consider granting an approval of this project. However, if the Boston Public Works Department says, this is it, we're not giving you any more information, they refuse to show any more cards, and they want you to close the hearing, do it. And vote to deny the project for failure to provide requested information and for other substantive reasons. So with that, Dave?
If I may, I would just make a correction here. I realized I printed off today a letter from the city, but it was an earlier letter. I don't think you have responded to this, the September 3rd. Have you?
No, there was no September 5th response.
No, I printed it off September 5th, so that was.
Okay, so there wasn't a
There was not yet a response.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is David Murphy. Again, I'm a consultant for the city of Quincy, tie and bond, I'm the principal. We have submitted two memos to the commission, one dated June 6th and one dated August 21st. They were very extensive memos. Tonight it doesn't make any sense to go through those in detail. You have those in front of you and they stand on their own. It's important. I just want to touch on two issues, just to highlight some of the issues. Attorney Shea has just mentioned one of them. The BMPs, throughout the document and through the August 28th submittal that you received, the city received yesterday, I believe, it states in there that the contractor will be responsible as they get closer to the final design. They'll pass it on to the contractor to submit means and methods for the BMPs. Well, it's really important that the details of construction means and methods that the contractors, they have to adhere to in order to ensure proper protection of the functions and values of the wetlands. It's not enough to say that you're going to have them prepared by the contractors, and that it's not enough to say that other regulatory agencies allow that to go on. This is the Quincy Conservation Commission. You're fully within your rights to ask for the details of those BMPs. How are the limpets going to be attached to the side of the pier structures? How are you going to correct the lead caulking? How are you going to catch materials that might fall into the water? That's a perfectly legitimate question for you to be asking. It's the responsibility of the commission indeed to, to handle and see those and approve those BMPs. The Quincy Conservation Commission should not defer to the contractor what will be the way to protect the resource areas. That's one. And again, the memo has a whole bunch of issues, but I'm going to just touch on one other. The sea level rise. In the submittal that we had on the 28th, again, that was received yesterday, it says that they've designed or they're considering a 3-foot level sea level rise. The Quincy Conservation Commission itself, on their webpage, has a document, and I'll just read a quick paragraph. The City of Boston currently relies on the 2013 report of the Massachusetts Office of the Coastal Zone Management Sea Level Rise, understanding and applying trends, blah, blah. The Commission recommends that applicants prepare for at least the CCM intermediate high scenario for most projects, and the highest scenario for critical facilities and infrastructure. We have to believe that this is critical infrastructure to get over to Long Island. The sea level rise that the Boston Conservation Commission recommends that they design for is 6 feet. They've designed for 3 feet. So the bearings of the base of the bridge will be submerged in water, which is not an acceptable design practice. Time Bond remains concerned, as your consultants, that they've not properly addressed and quantified all the impacts to the resource areas, particularly the piers. So with that, I'd like to introduce Duncan Mellor from our firm to go through Dr. Gress's conclusions in his reports that was just given to the city several days ago. Duncan?
Thank you. Duncan Mellor, Principal Coastal Engineer with Time Bond. I got over 30 years experience in evaluating waterfront structures, including granite and concrete. David Gress was a member of our team in helping to review the documents that were provided as part of the submission. One of those was a petrographic analysis that was performed on the concrete cores that were taken out of the piers. Dr. Gress reviewed those reports. There's an Appendix E that was provided that provided that petrographic analysis. He went through that and came up with different conclusions from what they found in that report. One thing, he emphasized the point that the concrete is lacking air entrainment, which are small little bubbles that are entrained into modern concrete that gives the water in the concrete somewhere to go to when it freezes. By not having that, you run the risk of having more freeze-thaw damage. In other words, every time the concrete goes through freeze-thaw cycles, you'll get swelling and cracking of the concrete. They also looked in that study at the chloride concentration, chloride ions in the concrete, and found that they were significantly higher than the levels where it would induce corrosion in any steel that's embedded in that concrete. So the rebar that's embedded in that concrete, any post-tensioning they put in, that would all be subject to corrosion due to the chlorides that have already ingressed into that concrete. He also reviewed the photographs that are included in that Appendix E and said that they clearly indicate visually ASR and freeze-thaw damage that's occurred in that concrete. Looking at the photographs of the cores, he emphasized the fact that the cores appear to be more fractured, closer to the granite, and it's more to the outside of the concrete. A lot of the testing was done on the portion of the concrete cores that was taken further on the interior of the pier. It's anticipated that this will be a progressive type of deterioration that will occur to the concrete. That deterioration is going to start from the outside where it's exposed to the water and the freeze-thaw most heavily and progress inward and accelerate over time. Dr. Gress's opinion was that the cost-effective life expectancy of these piers has already expired. They're approximately 70 years old. The City of Boston is looking to get another 75 years out of them. So, on the order of 150-year life they're expecting to get out of this concrete. It's got both the alkali silica reaction, which is essentially like a cancer of concrete. It's typically caused by the reactive aggregates, the stones that are used in the concrete. That's clearly showing up in the photographs that were in the Appendix E report, with what they call the reaction rings around the aggregate. What happens with that is when the ASR, the reaction that goes on there with that aggregate, is exposed to moisture, it starts to expand to the concrete, and so you get cracking of the concrete. The more cracking you get, the more water intrusion you get, and it progresses its way into the concrete of the bridge pier. This is a significant concern, and his basis for his opinion that the concrete has already reached the end of its life expectancy. He did note that the ASR and the freeze-thaw damage is expected to actually accelerate over time. Again, with that cracking and the ability of the water to get inside the concrete of the pier, that reaction, the cracking of the concrete, the expansion of the concrete is expected to accelerate over time. So you can't just make a linear projection because it's already survived 70 years, it will last another 75. At the end of that report, Dr. Gress does make some recommendations for additional testing that he thinks are important to look at, to those peer reuse, to see what kind of quality that concrete is and whether or not his opinions on this review of the Appendix E report are founded. He recommends more coring of the concrete that would be more extensive around the pier, in greater depth into the pier, and then also non-destructive testing to look at delaminations and cracks that are occurring inside the concrete. So those would be tests that he recommends be done on the piers to make sure that they can be reused for a new structure.
Would you like us to respond to that now, or take on the testimony? What's your preference?
Is there any other testimony from city consultants? Let's get a response to that, and then we'll ask.
So I'm assuming that mostly from our law department, who will address some of the jurisdictional issues, and then Nicole Bolger will come back on sea level rise and the pier structures.
Thank you, Chief. My name is Sandy Nabolsi. I'm with the City of Boston Law Department, and I just want to address a couple of points that were brought up by John Shea. I won't repeat anything that we have in the documents. First I want to clarify the response that the city made. That was just not a correct reading of the response. And if you look at I'll point you to the exact spot so you can read it for yourselves, but it's the August 28th letter. And I think John is pointing at the last paragraph on page 1 of attachment A, where the city said, in addition, we just assert that it is premature to request the advanced design and construction phase means and methods information identified in the memo. And then we actually say that the Quincy Wetlands Protection Ordinance itself only requires information and plans as are deemed necessary by the commission. So we're not telling you you do not have the ability to request information and plans. We're telling you that the local wetlands ordinance requires us, upon request of the commission, to provide you the plans as we propose the work. The city is not trying to hide the ball or keep anything away from the commission. The fact of the matter is we don't have final plans yet. Why? It's not so we're asking the Quincy Conservation Commission and the Boston Conservation Commission to rely on our contractor, but we just know, as is the ordinary course in permitting, that as we go to the Conservation Commissions, as we go through the state permitting procedures, and even here as we go through Coast Guard and Department of Army approvals, there will be additional conditions attached. And until we know what all the requirements are of the different permitting authorities, then we can prepare a spec sheet and say, hey, contractor, not only are these our requirements, but these are also the requirements of the Quincy Conservation Committee and Commission in the City of Quincy, the requirements of the Boston Conservation Commission, the requirements of the MEPA office, the requirements of the Department of Environmental Protection, the requirements of Coastal Zone Management, the requirements of Coast Guard, so on and so forth, all of the agencies that we are proposing and showing this project to. And so that's why we don't have final plans for you today, because what you do here today dictates our final plans. And we are happy to provide those to you when we have them. In fact, one suggestion I would make is that, and this is what we did with Boston, we're happy to do it here, is that the City of Quincy, as a condition in the order of conditions, that before the city begins work, that we provide the commission with all final plans and designs. And if the commission sees that there's been a change in an alteration to an impact area, or our impact areas have increased from what is originally proposed, then yes, we need to appear before the Quincy Conservation Commission on basically what is an amended order of conditions. And we recognize that, and we're prepared to add that to the order of conditions if need be. The other thing I'll say is that pointing to the impacts that we identified here, it's not up, but you have it in your presentations. It's actually correct. I agree with John. Those are deliberately low. The reason they're deliberately low is because we deliberately designed a project to minimize environmental impacts. Those are accurate numbers. It may be the case that if you add the square footage of the work we're doing on the piers above the water and in the dry, technically there's an increase to square footage, but again, the Quincy Conservation Commission, this is when we go back to purview, reviews alterations that we propose to resource areas. That's not just under the Wetlands Protection Act, but the local wetlands ordinance in Quincy says that if we do an alteration, lists the different ways in which one can alter a resource area, and then it points to the Massachusetts General Laws 131, Section 40. And so that's where that point is coming from. And so when it comes to the impacts to resource areas as defined by both the Wetlands Protection Act and the local wetlands ordinance, those are accurate numbers. They're only low because we've decided to create a path forward that minimizes environmental impacts. And the last thing, I just want to address the comment that was made about the Boston Conservation Commission. Yes, Alice Richmond is wonderful. And the way the Boston proceedings has been described to you is not actually what happened. So at the May meeting, where the Boston Conservation Commission first received the memo that was provided by Tyne Bond in the city of Quincy, and begun deliberations, they chose not to vote that night because of the statement made by Alice Richmond. So what they did is they closed the hearing on public testimony and then continued their deliberations and left it open so that they can come back on June 6th. And it was on June 6th that they then had further deliberations. Presumably by then the commission had 2 weeks, maybe a little longer, to review the submission, and then they took a vote that night, and they issued an order of conditions that is fairly standard as far as orders of conditions go. Yes, that order of conditions has been appealed by Mr. Shea in the city of Quincy. It's pending at DEP. It's not technically a nullity. It stops work until DEP either issues a superseding order of conditions or denies the project, or it's the possibility that DEP says that they can't look at this matter, in which case it brings back to life the Boston order of conditions. But that's not really relevant here, right? The commission can issue its own order of conditions and can condition the project as we've stated. And so now I'm going to turn over to Nicole Bulger, who will talk a little bit about the information that we received, I believe, today, and then also address the sea level rise issue as well.
I just wanted to quickly touch on the sea level rise question. I know, right, we've all seen how many numbers there are out there for sea level rise forecasts and what percentages. And this actually was discussed. It was discussed with the Boston Conservation Commission as well. It's a very important issue to them. So what we show on this figure is a 40-inch sea level rise. If you look at a 72-inch sea level rise, what you see is that this is our roadway elevation. So 40 inches is what's shown here between the existing knee-high water and what would be proposed. That's our 40 inches. So if we double that, you see that really our bearings and our bridge deck are still above that elevation. So it's not something that's going to actually be flooding this roadway and blocking access to critical infrastructure. And then related to the, I'll take this back here. You just heard a lot about the concrete report that we all recently received, an explanation on ASR and chlorides. I think one of the most important points from our perspective is related to the purview of the person who was authoring that report and the fact that the design that we described to you for the piers was not included in that. So the city has reviewed the report and specifically the comments related to the structural integrity of the substructures. It should be noted that bridge piers of this age and older are regularly kept in service and rehabilitated for reuse in the Boston area, for example, on Summer Street, and throughout the country. The items in the report that have merit are addressed by the extensive testing program already performed and by the city's proposed design as presented in the notice of intent filing. Although apparently not reviewed by the report author, the design as presented includes rebuilding and repairing existing abutments, removing existing exposed concrete on piers, repointing and repairing pier granite facing, installing post-tension strengthening bars within the substructure cores, and placing new reinforced concrete pier caps. The proposed modifications will be in accordance with current codes and standards applicable to bridge design and rehabilitation, and the rehabilitated substructures will serve the community for the proposed 75-year cycle. And we actually have, at the end of the presentation, We went over these back in June. Other relevant projects, bridges are rehabilitated, substructures are rehabilitated around the country and in this area frequently. So.
Any other comments?
Yeah, that's just a brief statement. Ty and Bond never said that the piers were resource areas. They're structures within and above resource areas. That was the point in the memo. And as to the footprint, way back when, probably June 6th, we explained that a more usual construction methodology around these piers, especially if significant amount of repairs or replacements are needed, was the use of coffer dams. You guys know about coffer dams, you've seen them. Instead, they want to hang bags off the side to catch debris. The reason we say these numbers are not accurate is that if you take the standard coffer dam design around the circumference of these piers to allow dewatering and to allow the repair to depth, is that there will be a greater impact to wetland resource areas and to land under water. So those were the only 2 points of disagreement. I'd urge again this commission to demand the information that you need to evaluate whether or not these real concerns by the city's consultants and by Dr. Giss are accurate. Last point. I was at the Boston Concom hearing. The order of conditions was pre-negotiated. In fact, they turned to the applicant and said, what do you think? Well, I'd like to change this and this. There wasn't any evaluation in the Ty and Bond memo. Yeah, they closed the hearing, and then they held a public hearing, and they did their deliberation, but it was on the approval order of conditions. So I think that's a little cute to try to say that they gave it full faith and review of the Ty and Bond. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I'm good, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Did you have a recommendation?
Excuse me?
Do you have a recommendation?
No,
Okay.
Testimony.
Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Bill Harris. I'm the Ward 6 City Councilor, and I represent the people who are going to be directly affected by if this project goes through. I'm really going to make a mistake because I'm going to go off script. I usually prepared myself, but I heard some things tonight that kind of disturbed me. The attorney, I'm sorry I don't know your name, he used the phrase, hide the ball. And then the representative for the city also mentioned that there was going to be a recovery center. So what winds up happening is when someone like myself and other members of government go up against a city like Boston, who's not following the guidelines of what our city does. But I just recently found out that Boston isn't even following their own guidelines when it comes to community meetings and the community that some of the folks represent. They're ignoring what the people are saying. They don't care about the folks here. They want to use a word, recovery center, and if we go against it, we look like bad guys. My God, we need more recovery centers throughout this country, throughout our city, throughout Boston. They could have recovery centers right now going on. They could have a ferry right now going right out. I went out to dinner at Spectacle Island. It was wonderful. They boated out 150 people, gave them a clam bake. We had a clam bake, and we were home in 2 hours. So to throw something at a community without telling us what's going to be there, without showing us the plans of what's there, without following what procedures we go through. Now, I'm going to have some work done on my house. I'm going to have to come possibly in front of you folks, right? That's the rules. We follow the rules. We have community meetings when projects, this is community meetings with this size project. And for us being the people of my ward, and not only my ward, the city of Quincy, which will be affected. Not only the city of Quincy, it'll affect the traffic going all the way from Hull over to Boston, which I drive in each day. So, hide the ball, folks. They've hit the ball, and they haven't followed the procedures. I've written a letter. I got the same response. So I respectfully hope that you folks hear what our attorneys and Ty and Bond have said, and of course the report, the press report, makes it clear. And I'm now going to even get myself in more trouble. There's a road which leads, I'd love to see it, which leads, Moon Island Road. I'm going to get myself in a lot of trouble. Moon Island Road has 16 orange barrels. I have photographs of the asphalt of that road. It's about a quarter mile up from the guard shack, which doesn't even come close to where the first pier is. The asphalt, you know what it's made of, and it's been there forever. It's crumbling into the ocean. You can see exposed, I have a picture, exposed conduit, electrical conduit. Before they can even go to this point, they got to fix that road. And they have to come before you folks. And you have to protect our environment. Please, the young lady spoke about making sure containment. Right now, they're not containing Moon Island Road. Asphalt is falling in as trucks and vehicles go to Moon Island as we speak. I humbly thank you. I'd like to introduce Representative Bruce Ayers.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I've attended both the hearings, and I'm extremely disappointed to hear the comments of Mr. Murphy, Mr. Shea. I think the mayor's team did a great job in their due diligence to try to come up with information, and to hear that they think that you should demand information for basic, legitimate questions on this proposal is very disturbing. It's disturbing for me, it's disturbing for our constituents. All along, we've been asking for how this is going to impact the lead contamination, the erosion, the marine life, the wetlands impacts, and then to hear tonight the additional concerns of the egress concrete. And Boston had alluded to that it was 50 years old, but it's more like 75 years old. And Ms. Belger indicated that the steel boring would go into that, and I think would only cause more damage, more erosion, more destruction. To see the New England weather climates where you have freezing and thawing is only going to be more destructive to that. So as the state representative of this area, I would urge you to oppose this. I am strongly in opposition to this. I'm strongly opposed to it because of the way that this proposal has been brought out by the city of Boston, the lack of information they provided to the board, and the consideration to the residents of Squantum and North Quincy on this issue.
But just one last thing, I would recommend to the board that you may want to request that the city provide a professional report stamped by a professional engineer in the Commonwealth that addresses the concerns raised in Dr. Gress's report.
Any other comments? Consideration by the board. My concern from the first June hearing was, alternatives analysis was, whether we agree with it or not, that's not really our jurisdiction, but the pier deterioration and whether it's adequately addressed in terms of what's going on with those piers and whether we're going to have temporary protective structures if there's below the water repair or coffer dams, which is no impact. And what concerns you with?
Well, they have information we have not received, is that correct?
Well, according to the Gress report, he's requesting additional testing in addressing this report. We've only just received it.
If it is useful, though, the team can speak to sort of the accredited testing that's already been done and the source of that testing. That's useful for you.
Would you address that?
So many of the statements that were in the Gress report, William Goulet.
Good name, I'm sorry. William
Goulet, G-O-U-L-E-T. We've reviewed the report that Gress was provided to us via tie and bond. What we had provided in our structures report, which is part of what he reviewed, what he listed in documents wasn't our full structures report. It did not include our proposed alterations. A good portion of the concrete that he refers to is exposed concrete that is being demolished, that's being replaced. Some of the parts of that report that he goes into depth on, the petro analysis. All of the test results that were put into our report that he reviewed are from an accredited AASHTO testing facility, an independent facility. They classified all the ASR as minor and not degradation to the structural capacity of the concrete. So there can be a discussion further on with us and them, but we have provided substantial testing that's been run through an accredited facility by AASHTO, which controls bridge design here in the state and across the nation. So to that regard, we don't see all of the points that he has made as valid points.
But that's information that you have that hasn't been shared to us.
I believe the structures report has, it was contained within the documentation that was provided earlier this summer.
Do you have any, I know it's recent, but do you have any response to the recommendation for this additional coring testing?
We believe what we've done for testing, coring, we've cored every pier. Some piers have had multiple cores done. What we've done is in standard practice for standard reuse of bridges. It's typical. What we have done is the level of effort that's put into it. And we've received favorable results from the testing that has been done, which would not suggest that more testing is required.
Well, our consultant thinks that additional testing is required, and if there is information you have or information you can supply, can we address it to this report?
Again, we used an accredited facility for testing, and they gave us their results and their analysis of it.
I think he wants a response to the report.
We can. We're just going to say this is the results that we provided that he reviewed. They're from an accredited association, controlled by AASHTO, accredited by AASHTO. That is what standard practice would give you as a result. That would be our response to the questions that he's raising.
Chairman, it would actually be really helpful to say, answering your question or providing information to kind of know a bit more about the interest, right? So in that report identifies, we disagree with it, and there's been testing that documentation provided, but it's really about the existing piers and the type of reactions or what have you that are happening with the salt water in the area. Obviously, the proposed work, and it's not happening in the water, it's all happening in the dry, resolves those issues as proposed, and that's part of our notice of intent. So I guess what we are curious about is from the Quincy Conservation Commission, whether it be the local ordinance or the state act, the concerns that are brought up in that memo, from your perspective, how is it then tied to work being done in a resource area?
I think we're concerned about the future of that resource area.
So
if they're not structurally sound, or if these bridges will only last 10 years because of the degradation of the concrete, it's something we're gonna have to deal with 10 years down the road, not 70 years like you're hoping. So.
Right, so is your concern that, I just wanna make sure I have it right.
No, I understand.
Is your concern that we are going to be back here in 10 years trying to build a new bridge, or is your concern
I think
that
our
the bridge?
concern is to protect the resource area,
Right, but I guess how is it being harmed?
the potential for it to be harmed.
If these deteriorate, I think it's really, if these deteriorate quicker than you project, then there will be deterioration into the resource area, and there'll have to be more work done.
You're worried about, in the future, pieces falling off the piers?
Or redoing these piers entirely, which then you're getting into the seabed area. Things that you're trying to minimize now, you may make worse by not correcting these problems. Is that, I mean, I'm not the engineer, but I think that's a legitimate concern of ours, which is, you know, you're balancing something by not doing new piers now, saying, okay, that'll be less impact, but if they have to be new piers in 10 years, then you increase the impact. Is that a fair way to say it?
Right, so it sounds like your concern is really that if we, despite what's been provided, right, if all of that is wrong, the concern is we're coming back in 10 years to put in new piers.
And then doing, well, in the meantime, there's deterioration of these piers, and then you're impacting the flow once again.
Coming back on new piers and deterioration of these piers, which I guess includes things falling into the water. Is that what you mean by deterioration, that impacting resource areas?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Now, I will defer a little bit to our consultants, because they're the engineers, so let me ask.
Yeah, just on that question of adequate testing, one of the things that Dr. Gress had mentioned was that they had not taken...
Identify yourself again for the record, just so...
Duncan Miller from Taiwan. Dr. Gress had mentioned that there were no cores taken underwater, and one of the aspects of alkali silica reaction expansion is the presence of water. If it's in a dry environment, it will not expand, but when you put that into water, you need that water to get the gel for the ASR to actually start to swell and expand and crack the concrete. So we certainly have found it many times before where there is significant cracking in concrete underwater caused by alkali silica reaction. The study that they did not take any cores from underwater.
Okay, I guess that was something I was wondering about your study. Is that true?
Yes, we did not do any underwater cores. One of the actual areas that's the highest accelerated ASR reaction areas is where you have wetting and drying. Wetting and drying causes alkali migration into the concrete. Alkali is what actually is the salt component that drives the ASR reaction. So actually in the splash zone is a lot of times where you have the highest concentrations, the buildups of ASR reaction.
Don't you
The
think you'd
gel-
be covering your bases by just testing those areas that you didn't test?
Again, what we've done so far is standard practice.
I guess
that
standard practice is just that.
I think
If we can-
just quickly to clarify, we tested in the tidal zone,
Yeah.
so that's what he was trying to say. Is that we didn't test entirely underwater, we tested in the area that gets this
Above
exposure
splash.
inconsistency.
Yes.
Right.
So it gets the wetting, and usually that's where you'll see the most accelerated portions. It's not constantly wet, so the gel isn't constantly expanded. As he's talking about is where it's underwater, it's always expanded, but you don't get the same rate of reaction underwater as you can in some of these other areas. So I wouldn't say that one area is more conservative than the other to take the core underwater or above or in the splash zone. We think the splash zone is representative of what would be in the piers.
Well, I mean, we would like a response to this. You know, this project's not going to happen tomorrow, so We would like a response to Dr. Gress's report, and if your response is, here's our tests, we think that's adequate, that's your response. If your response is, we'll do some testing underwater, then that'll be a response. But we would, it's a concern of ours, and I think it's legitimately in the resource area.
Mr. Chairman, just one point from me. Don't be locked into you're concerned about 10 years down the road. Our concern is right now. If you have to do the repairs that we think need to be done, then the footprint area now is going to be larger.
I'm sorry, in terms of, then you're gonna have to do the damming rather than.
Right. I mean, it's a legitimate concern 10 years down the road, but we're really talking about the work as proposed right now.
Because the proposal is not to use coffer dams right now? Is that the proposal?
That's correct.
And if you could address that, which is, we don't believe we should use coffer dams for this reason, because that is more protective, but it affects more of the resources.
No, we do not think that it's necessary to use coffer dams, and as Sammy mentioned, we deliberately designed this project to have the minimum impact possible for the reuse of these piers. We are not proposing coffer dams, we do not.
I appreciate that, but I think the point of our consultants is, if the deterioration is more significant than you think below water, you might have to use coffer dams.
In that case, we would have to come back before you with a new proposed design.
If we do the testing now, maybe we'll know.
No, we have done sufficient testing to show what's required. If anything were to change down the road, we would have to come back before you. We do not anticipate that to occur. We have done extensive testing that's typical for this type of treatment location.
Okay. I don't think we're prepared to vote yet without a response to this letter. Either whether it's, here's a test, that's it, or here's what more we're going to do.
I just wanted to note, if you look at that Appendix E, which is the petrographic analysis of the concrete that was performed, I believe you'll see that it was signed by a lab manager and a field technician. So there was no professional registration or stamp on that. So it appeared that they were making structural determinations about the accuracy of the concrete when they may not have been qualified to be making that determination. So that's why we're just asking.
That would be addressed in the response to this report.
Correct.
Is that, so at this point, are you satisfied to give us a response at our next meeting?
No. So our intent is actually not to continue this PR item. That will trigger the 21 days, and so we'll give you a response within that 21 day window. Okay. Essentially start that 21-day shot clock to be able to allow us to be able to get that final response back to you, and then we look forward to your vote between now and the 26th. And if there's other information or other things that you can do, and come back before you between now and the 26th. We're happy to do that.
Is that adequate for the board?
I'm thinking we ought to continue this to the next meeting and give everybody a chance to get all the
what
information and contradictions and everything else.
I mean, if you're going to give us the response, we'd have to have a vote.
Right. Well, basically what we're saying, Chairman, is that we do not agree to a continuance until next month. What we're saying is under the Act, you have 21 days to make a decision and issue a determination. Tomorrow, so in our preliminary structures report, we have the testing and it's stamped. We'll send that to you tomorrow. That gives you, and the 21-day clock starts tomorrow, so you have the full 21 days to read it, look at it, and get back in this room in compliance with open meeting law, and we expect a determination by the 26th of September.
So they're asking you to close the hearing tonight, not to be able to have this recorded information be part of the record that would be forming the basis for a decision.
Chairman, that's incorrect. We're not asking you to close the hearing tonight. You have 21 days to issue a determination. If we meet in 2 weeks, right, you can continue the hearing for 2 weeks, or actually even 3 weeks from now. It gives you a tight timeline to draft your determination. So maybe in 2.5 weeks, whatever you need. But we're basically saying we'll come back in 2 weeks. Public hearing continues. Mr. Shea and his consultants may submit another response to our response. and we'll have that discussion then, but in any event, we're expecting a determination within 21 days from tonight.
Well, and so essentially you're asking us to have no further meetings, because we only have our meetings once a
Well,
month.
21
Is that for you to have a meeting?
Have another
21
meeting.
days is almost the next meeting anyway.
But that's the law.
The law says 21 days from the close of the public hearing for you to issue a decision. Not receive something else and the 21 days starts tonight. It starts from when you close the hearing.
And we're not prepared to close the hearing yet.
I think there's more information to come in.
Well, I just then want to note that the city objects to a continuance of the hearing.
Okay.
We're gonna have a vote?
If you're gonna,
No, have a vote to continue there.
if you're gonna have some information on concrete out of this report, or responses out of this report to us, I'd also like to see some responses to the photographs that shows the granite exterior pulling apart. And specifically photo 37, which shows the concrete cracked, literally falling apart.
Those photographs are actually taken from our report.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Those photographs are taken from our
Right.
report. We're aware of that, and that has led to the rehabilitation design. This was the basis, the information that he reviewed forms
Was
the
for-
basis for our structural design to rehabilitate those structures. That's why you see that we're removing some of the concrete, we're repointing and repairing the granite facing, we're replacing, we're adding and strengthening. All of those things were not reviewed by Dr. Gress. He did not receive that information. We provided it to you and to Tide and Bond, but they did not give it to him, it appears. It's not part of the documentation he reviewed.
I mean, he took the photographs, he's aware of your report.
That was the preliminary structures report. They did not provide him with the additional information about what was being changed as part of the proposed project.
Well, I think that can be addressed in a response. We won't have to delay it today. But at this point, I think we're going to.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
for the record, Jay Duker, the Director of Inspection Services, as your conservation agent, I make a recommendation that you close the public hearing tonight and vote it down for lack of information. Thank you.
What is the board's, they're demanding a vote within 21 days and objecting to our continuance.
I would again reiterate our willingness to provide answers to your specific question.
But are you objecting to a continuance?
That's correct.
We have to take a vote.
Yes, the close the hearing.
Okay, I know, that's what we take a vote to close the hearing and
Basic thing is to close the hearing and issue negative order conditions.
for
For lack of
information
detail.
and substantive concerns about the structures.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
and a second?
I
That was
make
your
a
motion, that was your
I make a
motion. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that's just the process. Thank you.
Thank you.
And to clarify, that's under both state and local wetlands ordinance?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You got all that? Do we have anything else on the agenda? One more?
I hope so. Well, Capital One, all right, you know, so. Well, you know what? You know, you're the neighborhood has changed. You know, I'm downtown, and I'm coming back my full-time in 10 years. It's changed. And one of the reasons that is there is because of the scoutmaster for everybody that's in it. It's been brought to our attention.
Yeah. It's very,